Well, a very good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. So in this session, we're going to be discussing well, I don't know whether it's a controversial topic, maybe a topic we don't talk about enough in the BA community, which is about letting go. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's an argument that says actually to progress, to learn, sometimes you have to let go of stuff that you've previously believed, whether that's expertise, whether it's, you know, a previous perspective that you or I might have had. I mean, gosh, for anyone that's known me for any length of time, you'll know that in the 6 months of lockdown, I've let go of dressing professionally for video calls, and and genuinely, due to popular demand and some of the ribbing on LinkedIn, rather than wearing a Commodore 64 t-shirt that I was wearing last week, I'm wearing an Atari t-shirt this week. So that's for the folks that made that specific request. But it's my absolute pleasure this evening to welcome, well, very well known and very good friend of mine, David Beckham. Now, I'm sure most or all of you will know Dave, whether that's from his keynote speeches, his presentations. One of the only people I can remember who's ever got a very well-deserved standing ovation at the BA Conference Europe. Runs his own consultancy, previous head of practice, so much more I could say, and of course, blogger extraordinaire. Dave, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Adrian. No pressure there, then.
Yeah, I'm just bigging you up so that
what did I say about don't big me up too much? Well,
if you say that, Dave, you just know I'm going to do it. But,
yeah.
But fantastic. So, and a reminder to anyone that is tuned in live, we'll be taking questions as we go along, so do type your questions in the Q&A panel. Once we get going, you can interrupt us at any time. We'll cover as many questions as we possibly can. Also, a reminder to anyone who's attending live, in just a couple of seconds, I will be popping a link, a little URL into the chat window, so just bear with me. There we go. And that link is a link to a Google Jamboard. Now, just in case you haven't been on one of these calls before, or if you're not familiar, Google Jamboard is a shared whiteboard. So you'll be seeing something that looks a bit like this whiteboard over here. And you can, as we're going through, if there's something Dave says that you think is particularly noteworthy, you might want to add a note. And it's like collective note taking, right? So we've got something, we're like crowdsourcing the notes from the session. Rather interestingly, Google have updated this recently, and you've got shapes and things and text on there as well. So play around, do whatever you like. And what I tend to do is not look at this until about half time, and then we bring it back again. And it's always terrifying because I have no idea what will be drawn on there, but we'll find out, Dave. So fantastic. So Dave, your topic today is about letting go and about being, you know, the sort of baggage-free BA. So I suspect all of us have got a slightly different perspective on what it means to let go. What do you mean when you say let go?
I think where I'm coming from is that you don't have to necessarily be an expert at a product domain or a system or a process or a part of a business or a business in itself to be a good BA. One of the expressions I use is I'm a specialist in generalism. You know, I know a little about a lot rather than a lot about a little. And I think as a BA, you're really there to, your specialism, your expertise is how to get the customer from the point they started at to the point they need to get to. Not necessarily the point you think they need to get to, because, you know, you might have a different view and yours might be right, but yours might be wrong. But, you know, it's about being in the middle of things without having an attachment to it, I think, in general. And I think it's something that's allowed me to have a lot less stress and a lot less fear about my role, because if you don't get attached to much, you can't really get offended by by much either, if you see what I mean. So that's what I think. That's the general gist of what I'm talking about when I sort of talk about letting go of things, or just taking the hand off the steering wheel, in a sense.
That's interesting, isn't it? That phrase you just used there, Dave, take the hands off the steering wheel. So I just want to explore that a little bit further, because taking the hands off the steering, like if you're driving, I mean, if you're driving on a motorway or something, that's actually quite, like, the literal interpretation is quite, it could be taken as quite dangerous, but actually what it implies to me is a relinquishing of control, and potentially the delegation of control to someone or something else. So, for example, if you took I've never had a car with cruise control or anything like this, but if you had cruise control or something, maybe it's okay to take the hands off the steering wheel. So is there an element? It's probably not, actually, now I think about it out loud, but yeah, don't do this at home.
We've all been there, Adrian.
Yeah, yeah. But is there an element of that then, of letting go, that's actually letting go of the need to control everything, or to feel control over everything?
Yeah, and I think when I do facilitation training, and when I mentor people in facilitation, what I talk about is using the power of the group. Because what I've found over the years is the group will regulate themselves just as effectively as you can as a BA. So when I kind of first got into workshops, I sort of got the impression that I had to control it. I had to know exactly where we were going, what was going to happen, what we were going to use. And it turned out that was a feature of my Myers-Briggs INTJ rating, which is...
Me too. And someone else who I know we both know, and who's been on many webinars, is Tina Lovelock. And Tina Lovelock's an INTJ as well, which is interesting, isn't it?
It's funny, isn't it? And it's also interesting that it's introvert, not extrovert. But a lot of people get quite surprised at that. But I have actually trained myself to be extrovert in a professional sense, in the presentation and the facilitation sense. But socially, I'm quite introverted. So I've realised that if you're in a group of people, and there is, particularly in the old days when I started, you would do requirements workshops in a room from 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock, 5 days a week for like 4 weeks at a time on an agile project. And it was a bit like one of those films where you get trapped in a submarine. You'd all get scruffy and panicky, and someone would have a panic attack and you'd have to slap them, and it'd all get a bit stressy. And there was very much a kind of imperative of the BA to lead and control. But what I found was, if somebody was not acting in the group's best interest, so we would always agree the objectives as part of the workshops up front. I always think that's a very good, important thing to do for a BA, because that's what the resource you keep coming back to. And if somebody was messing about and perhaps going off on a tangent, or just generally being bullish, I noticed eventually the group would say, well, hang on a minute, we want to get out of here at 6 o'clock this evening. We'd like to go home and have tea. So can we get back on track? And I found that with groups, you can impose your authority, but through the group. So you can say, thanks, X. That's a really interesting point. I don't feel it's getting us to where we need to go. How does the group feel about it?
Yeah.
So you're kind of controlling without controlling. You're letting the group express its will, and you normally find that that's a lot easier to control a stakeholder by that method than it is by me taking them on, because then it gets into a to you to me to you to me to you to me thing. Yeah. Everyone gets bored. And you don't normally resolve anything. So there is that sort of relinquishing control, but you do it through the group. Yeah,
that's really interesting. So what you're saying, if I understand correctly there, Dave, is actually, yes, it's relinquishing, or we might, let's be provocative, it's relinquishing the illusion of control, because we've never really got control. We just think we have until we find we haven't. But actually, by engaging and by having a more participatory approach, we find we don't need the control anyway, because the group is stronger than any one individual.
And especially, I think, if you've got the group to agree their own almost terms of reference and terms of the way they're going to behave, and their own objective. Because if you come in and say, I think we need to do this, immediately you're positioning yourself against the group. But if you say to the group, what do we need to achieve to get to this outcome? It's their collective outcomes that they're working towards. So they're more likely to regulate members of the group. There's a converse of that. What I made the hideous mistake once with a particularly, what's the word I can use? Strong stakeholder.
Awkward.
Yes. Very, 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 very sure of their own mind. And I made the mistake. I thought I've got to get them A, to buy in, and B, to be quiet. So I said, why don't you just record some of these requirements for a little while? I never got the flip chart back, and that was a huge error. That was one thing I learned. If you give that, figuratively give that flip chart pen or that laptop or whatever it is to somebody, you have to be damn sure you're going to get it back again. Well, that was a nightmare.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've heard people in facilitation talk about standing back and stepping forward. And actually, and it is interesting, isn't it, Dave? Because you think about, like, if I think about really good sessions where we've, facilitated something and it's felt really good and the groups work really well, I actually haven't had to do a lot in the session. I've had to do a lot before, a lot after. But sometimes it's the doing before that creates the conditions, and everyone's then prepared, and you just sort of get out of their way, don't you?
Yeah.
In a way.
I was going to ask you, when you said that, was it a case of you felt it went really well, and you then sat back wondering, what did I do? Well, and I think that's the mark of a good facilitator. You don't get noticed because it kind of lets the group evolve itself.
I remember once it was a really. Well, there's no other way of saying this. The subject matter was dull. I mean, sometimes that's just that's the life of a BA, right? Isn't it? I mean, and I just remember a stakeholder saying, "I really enjoyed that workshop, and I didn't expect to." And when it's like one of those bits of feedback that stays with you because you're like, "Wow, okay, what was different about that workshop to other workshops?" And yeah, interesting. So stepping back and letting go, Dave. So you've talked about letting go of control, or metaphorically taking the hands off the steering wheel. What else might we need to let go of as BAs?
I think you've got to let go of any feeling that anybody's reaction in the room is personal to you. Is a personal thing. It can, when you're facilitating, you put a lot of energy in, a huge amount of energy, as you'll know, Adrian. And it might be one of those workshops that works really well, and you've been like a swan. You've glided across the surface of the water with your little legs paddling like mad underneath, and you've put a heck of a lot of energy in. And sometimes it's easy to get drawn into. I remember on some of my early facilitation skills training, the trainer said, never be a fighter and never be a rescuer. Never feel you have to fight anyone and never feel you have to rescue anyone, because both can be equally damaging in the sense of facilitation. And it's true. You kind of got to you've got to be very impersonal whilst being very personal. It's very paradoxical. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was in a workshop once, and it was hard going. It was a tough project. It was a big project, and one of the biggest stakeholders, not he wasn't like Incredible Hulk or whatever, but he was one of the more powerful stakeholders. Just stood up, folded his arms, and said, "This is all rubbish." Insert appropriate.
Yes.
And I was still, learning my trade really, but I harked back to my training and I thought, right, stay calm, take a breath, and instead of going, "No, it isn't," which he would have responded to, "Yes, it is," "No, it isn't," "Yes, it is," "No, it isn't," "Yes, it is," I just said, "That's a really interesting view. Tell me more about why you think that." And he just sort of went, because he expected me to go into combat. That's kind of what he was expecting and what he wanted, I think. But it turned out that really he felt that he hadn't had a chance to express his concerns about the project up till that point. So it wasn't, he didn't think the workshop was rubbish. He didn't think what we were doing was rubbish. He just had an axe he wanted to grind. So I let him grind that axe for about 10 minutes. And then I said, okay, what can we do differently? And he had to admit there wasn't really a lot we could do differently, but he felt better. He was able to move beyond it, and the group was able to move beyond it. So I think it's quite important to let go of feeling personally, personally attached to the output or the outcome, or even what you're doing in the workshop.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because like, I suppose one way of viewing it is actually we're not the output. Actually, we don't really own the output of the workshop, but what we are is we channel it and we conduit. We conduit the output, and I guess a conduit. What's a conduit? It's like a pipe, right? Well, actually, if two different coloured liquids go in a pipe and they don't, and they stop, that's not really the pipe's fault, is it? Right? It's the I mean, we're more active than the pipe in that way. But so we've got a question coming in from James. And James says, does this work if the group is dominated by several people? So I think that was about some of the previous topics we were talking about there. But we've always got that common dilemma when you've got very strong voices in a group. Yeah,
and I think again you have to approach that in a sort of open and non-confrontational way. I mean, I could turn around and say to a stakeholder, "Well, you've said enough." That's probably going to have a result, but whether that will help,
it'll have a result, that's for sure.
Yeah, I may never work on that project or assignment again. I mean, there have been workshops, I have to say, where I have got rather heated with some stakeholders, but that's a story probably for another day. But you can, or you could say something like, I don't know, it might be me, but it just doesn't feel like the input is coming out evenly here. It feels like there's something in the room that I'm not seeing.
Yeah.
Now, if you've still got a dominant stakeholder that people are still scared of, you may not get any response to that. But it starts to set the scene for possibly other interventions. Like, actually what I'm hearing a lot of noise from here, but I'm hearing nothing for the rest of the group. Is there anything we can do differently? So I think, and sometimes it comes down to the fact that you have to have a word with that stakeholder during a coffee break and say, if you might want to turn it down a bit, or I feel that you're dominating the conversation, so we may be missing some important detail.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, reflecting on what you're saying there, Dave, I think something I've certainly seen work well is people just do. I mean, you have to have rapport, of course, but a good facilitator, in my view, will occasionally say things like, "Oh, Dave, I noticed you just looked a little bit uncomfortable back then. I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything." And you might say, "Oh no, I was just hungry," or it's nearly lunch, and that's fine. Oh, okay, good. Yeah. But actually, just picking up on those subtle signs as well is really important.
It can be very subtle as well. I mean, you can see in a group, the group will identify the dominant person. Normally if they're about to say something, they might look at the person, or they might look at the person after they've said it for affirmation. The dominant person might be the person who says the most. They might be the person who says the least, but they say it last. So you've got to be aware of these dynamics. And in fact, a lot of the time, the elephant in the room can be the most dominant person.
Yeah.
So they may be actually preventing you from getting to the outcome you need by their very presence. And that's a tricky one. And the only way you can really approach it is to have either an honest conversation with the group, but if the group don't feel comfortable doing that, maybe have a side conversation with that person saying, "Look, it might be better if I catch up with you after the meeting," or whatever,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think about a webinar session I ran last week with Paddy Dander and Grant Wright, which was about, a number of things, but use of visuals. And, one thing I always find is that visuals can be a bit of a leveler, because if people are dry, I mean, of course, there's still the conversation. You can't really, unless you make people do it in silence. But actually, if everyone's got a pen, or a sticky note or whatever, so I guess it comes back to us designing, if we're going to have the best output, we've got to create the conditions. We've got to cultivate it. Maybe we're like cultivators, in a way.
Well, it's an interesting point. One of the things I've been thinking about recently is kind of how we do our job in this little square box that we inhabit now in lockdown, or in remote working. And I think a lot of it is going to be about allowing people to participate more, because otherwise people are spending their entire day looking at meetings on a laptop, and that's hard work. That's tough. And I think if you allow people to participate more as a facilitator or as a BA, so perhaps you allow someone else to draw a context diagram, or you allow the team to draw it themselves. You haven't pre-prepared anything. You just said, right, let's draw a context diagram. Let's get up a Jamboard and let's play.
Yeah.
I think that is also letting go of control and letting go of the need to be in control of something.
Well, and that's it. And I mean, and actually that word play is really interesting, isn't it? Because I can remember, earlier in my career, being scared to use some workshop techniques because I thought you and I have many things in common, but one thing in common is we both sort of grew up in financial services.
Yeah.
And admittedly not the same company, but I think the cultures were probably broadly similar.
Yeah.
And I can remember in the insurance company I was working for at the time thinking, people aren't going to do that. Like, I'm going to be laughed out.
Yeah.
And it's only when I took the courage, and I don't know whether you had the same, take the courage and you find, okay, they might be reluctant, but then they get into it, then they see the output. And then I remember once I'd adorned the walls of a meeting room with all sorts of visual stuff that I hadn't drawn any of it, right? I was just facilitating. And there were the senior directors that happened to be having a meeting somewhere else that actually went in the room to go and see what it was. And I was, when you have that slightly affirmation feeling, it's like, okay, right, there is something in this then. Do you think there's an element of getting over our reluctance to experiment with new techniques?
Yes. Yeah, I think there is. There's something. I think you sometimes have to take a risk. Talking about adorning workshops, one of the first major project or program I worked on as a BA, I didn't know I was a BA at the time because we didn't have the title in the office, but that's what we were doing. Was redesigning the entire call center. This was back in the mid-90s when call centers were the new thing. And we were an unusual bunch. We were all out of the business and we were all finding our feet, and we were quite creative. And we ended up, as well as doing lots of process models, we ended up creating a menagerie of blue tack models. I think there was a giant squid and all sorts of different things. And we ended up making a nativity out of things that happened to be, because it was Christmas, out of things that happened to be available around the workspace.
Wow.
And it kind of got, it got well known. In fact, people would visit the floor just to see the nativity that we made. And I think what that did is that it built a different team spirit. And I'm still really good friends with all the people in that team because that really brought us together.
Yeah.
And another example was one of those really dull, big workshop programs I was talking about. We were in a room with no windows for like 4 days a week, and they delivered us a load of big whiteboards. So it all came in big cardboard packaging, around about the size of a door. So me and the other BA, we had a wardrobe door which said "To Narnia." We drew that on and put it up in the corner of the room, and then we also had the TARDIS as well. And it was just a bit of fun, And sometimes even it's going to sound really silly, but if you're in a room with no windows and have whiteboard, draw a window on the whiteboard. Yeah, it's amazing how much the group will actually participate in it. Just take a bit of a risk sometimes to build that vibe.
I mean, it's interesting because a lot of what you're saying there, Dave, is resonating with me a lot about, and it's that human. It's like, I don't know, I don't know if you found the same, but one thing I think I used to think was like, we have to be clinical and objective. And that means we can't, but it like change is inherently human. You can't do it. So on that note, actually, I've got a question coming from Jason. And Jason says, being able to gauge and reflect to the workshop attendees' body language is part of what's challenging when facilitating virtually in the current world, which is so true. Any thoughts on that, Dave, on in this virtual world we're living in, how can we work out what's going on for other people?
if this virtual world we live in
Yeah.
makes you give in a cry, I live and let die, I believe was the lyrics of that song, wasn't it? That's,
Something like that.
I think we're going to have to. I've been again doing a bit of thought about this lately, and I spent some time with a colleague, in fact, yesterday, talking about the online BA, for want of a better word. And I think we're going to have to find new ways of doing things and new etiquette for the online world. I noticed with interest, I think it was Zoom or Teams are coming up apparently with a whole new load of emoticons, because the feedback they're having is it's very difficult to get feedback. And it may be that we almost build in maybe a rhythm to our workshops where every 10 minutes we have a how are we feeling moment where everybody puts a thumbs up or a thumbs down or whatever it might be, or people can start using smileys or something to indicate yes, I don't know. I really do think we probably need a new etiquette for doing that, because you're right, it is hugely difficult to read body language through a Zoom, and particularly if you've got a lot of people on the call. It's like, you know, celebrity squares or whatever. You just can't do it. So I think we're going to have to, and it might be that as BAs, we're the best people to come up with the requirements for this new etiquette, you know. But, you know, be imaginative, you know, have a sense check every 10 minutes to say, how are we doing? You know, are we still on track? Let's see thumbs up, thumbs down, or whatever. Yeah, and just try and work different ways of working into it.
Yeah, definitely. It is interesting, isn't it? And I mean, I suppose being really provocative, we could say, well, hang on a minute. What have we done when we've taken workshops from the real world online, largely? We've said, okay, let's replicate the paradigm of workshops in a virtual environment, right? So we have a virtual whiteboard and we have a virtual meeting room and we have, but maybe a different way. This is I'm thinking on my feet, which is always dangerous, Dave. But,
no, that's good. Good.
But
go for it.
Maybe a different way is to say, okay, given the capabilities, you know, you need, because there are things you can do better online than you can do in person. You know, given that set of capabilities, what's the best way of eliciting a set of shared understanding?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not in the same way. Maybe it's interesting.
Maybe it's writing a song or something, you know. Who knows?
I mean, that would be phenomenal. But I mean, so on that note, actually, that segues really, really well into Ian's question. Yeah, no, it genuinely does. So
I'm a bit worried by this.
So Ian says, could you please sing no, Ian doesn't say that. Ian says, loving the conversation so far. I'm interested to know if David has taken a creative risk that didn't work in a workshop, and if so, why? Why was that? And would you try the same technique again, perhaps with a different audience? So, asking you to be honest about your failures, Dave.
Yeah.
Learning points, not
never had any. I either win or learn something. Yeah. I've had countless moments where what I call either moments, which is the nanosecond where you realise you made a terrible mistake and there's no going back from it. Normally, I don't necessarily plan them. I don't think they've been planned. The thing you may note about me, if you've not seen me before on a webinar, is I tend to be, as Adrian knows, I can be quite spontaneous. And the trouble is, something will happen in my brain and it will come out of my mouth before there's the logical checks processes. And I have had a couple of those in workshops where I've said something and I thought, that wasn't the right audience for that comment. But it wouldn't stop me trying again. I suppose the craziest thing I've done, or the weirdest thing I've done recently, was a webinar for IRM, where on GoToWebinar I had a video which had music on it, but GoToWebinar won't play music. So it was, for those of you old enough to remember a song called The Race by Yellow. It's a very, very old song. No, you're far too young, Adrian. But anyway, I played the video and I actually held up sort of like guitar solo or jazzy trumpets or whatever with post-it notes to the camera to simulate the music. The people on the webinar would have to tell you whether that worked or not. But in a sense, I think is it bad to try something and to fail and to look human? I don't think so. If it's not offensive or it's not damaged anything in any way, I think, you know, you're only trying to make things different, aren't you? You know, you're only trying to make things interesting and engaging for people. But yeah, there have been many occasions. I think probably the time I said, "Am I the only one in this room speaking human?" was probably the comment that was a bit too much.
But you know, but you didn't get sacked. So
no, I never got invited back to that project.
Fantastic. Well, this is the terrifying moment where I'm going to see what's happening on the Jamboard. So let me just bring it back onto this screen here. So let's just very.
So we find out nothing is happening on the Jamboard.
There's definitely stuff. Let's have a look. There's stuff. So oh gosh, wow, there's a lot of stuff. So we have train yourself in being an extrovert. Agree working norms and take the opportunity to learn. Not getting offended. The group's stronger. Oh, and make a joke of the stuff that goes wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is what you were just sort of alluding to there, Dave.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine to look human. What do we need to achieve to get this outcome? That's really interesting. Tell me why you think that. Oh, I'm going to enlarge that because I think that's such a great. Have faith in the group. Feedback online. People expect combat. Don't let them have it. Never be a fighter. Never be a rescue. People are picking up a lot of your sound bites, Dave. This is fantastic. So
I might as well not be here.
But you see, the board wouldn't be filling up like that if you weren't here. So, so if you weren't here at the very beginning of the session, you might not have that link yet. So I'm just going to put another link to it in the chat, just in case you weren't here at the very beginning. So there is the link again, just in case you need it. Okay, so let's take another couple of questions. So Dave, Nefra asks, what are your thoughts about creative ways to use a combination of Zoom and Mural, for example, to create worlds of possibility and encourage creative engagement? So Zoom and Mural, I suppose that could equally be MS Teams and Jamboards or or whatever.
I think it's certainly something that's worth doing. I think if you can get, people will learn if they contribute, and I think a lot of people learn by doing. And what we've got, and you made a great point earlier, Adrian, is I think what we've initially tried to do is transplant old world workshops into new Zoomy meeting type workshops, teamy type workshops. And I think with these media we have now, you need a different way of doing things and you need different rhythms, because if people are spending all day just reviewing documents, and here is page 5.
Yeah.
I'll point out I'm particularly pleased with paragraph 62A, stroke 5, and the people are just going, oh, get me out of here, you know. And so I think interactivity breaks the rhythm, and anyone who's seen my presentation skills training stuff, it's all about, and it's the same with facilitation, it's all about rhythm.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to be going from one to another to another to another to another to another. You want to be going, right, let's do this in a dynamic way. Oh, no, let's have a 5-minute break, talk about the weather. Yeah. And now let's do some brainstorming, or now let's do some agreeing how we're going to go forward. And I think you can, I think there are infinite ways you can use these new tools to make it more creative and more interactive with people. And it's a really exciting time. And, you know, I'm really impressed by the guys who are taking the bull by the horns with a lot of the visual stuff, you know.
Yeah.
It's marvellous. You know, I love drawing. Unfortunately, if I've got my Parkinson's kicking off, my drawings all look like little cardiograms.
That's less easy in that situation.
Yeah, but you know, I think as a medium, that kind of stuff is brilliant because it allows people to participate in a different way and make it memorable. And if they enjoy it, they'll come back.
Yeah. If they enjoy it, they'll come back. If it's enjoyable, it's memorable. If it's memorable, it's probably enjoyable. So
I think if people are enjoying things, they're going to give more.
Yeah.
Well. You know?
And pay attention as well.
Yes.
And
sorry,
so,
what did you say?
Yeah, yeah, very funny. So I'll just take, well, let's take one more question on the sort of virtual type stuff, then we'll move on to a slightly different topic. So Ara asks, or Ara observes, what I struggle with the most is the single channel in web calls, the lack of smaller conversations. Any ideas? And that's interesting, isn't it? Because often you have got, I mean, I know in Zoom you've got breakout rooms, but if you're in MS Teams, you've just got there's no back channel, is there? Or there's no verbal back channel.
No.
Any thoughts on that, Dave?
I think it's a tricky one, because if you're, you know, I know that you can, in the chat windows, you can sometimes address comments to an individual privately and that sort of thing. And I think that's, for me, that's dangerous. A, because I can't multitask. But B, I mean, in a room when you're facilitating, you may look like a swan, but you're essentially listening, looking at body language, writing down an answer, thinking about the questions that answer has actually made you think about. Have I answered that person's question from 3 questions ago? That chap looked like he wanted to say something. She needed to go and talk to her boss about that. You're juggling all the time, but you're doing it sort of in the confines of your own brain, which in a sense is more manageable and no one else needs to see it. But if I'm sat there like this, typing away a personal note on a chat window to somebody, I think people will pick up on that, you know. So it's a really tricky one, and I don't know how we can develop those back channels effectively remotely, apart from doing it outside the confines of the meeting. That I know that's not a particularly inventive answer, but I just feel that if you're facilitating, you need to have your attention on the group as much as possible, and getting involved in side conversations can be dangerous. That would be my view. I don't know what you think, Adrian.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I may be an outsider on this view, but I do. You see, I take the view that, well, and this is, I can only base it on my own experience, but I can't truly multitask.
No, I find it difficult to unitask.
Well, and you know, and I have been on calls where I've been writing an email, like I'll put my hands up, and I know I'm not listening when I'm doing it. And if I'm in a bit of the call I don't need to be in, then perhaps that's all right. But then perhaps there's the question of why was I in that call at all, type of thing. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe that's part of the answer. Maybe again, I mean, going back to reimagining workshops. Well, why do workshops have to be X hours long? Why couldn't they be 20-minute chunks where you invite, or, you know, if you don't really need everyone together in plenary, don't have everyone together in plenary. Yeah, no,
I think it comes down to being inventive, you know.
Maybe there's some new virtual platform just waiting to emerge, but
this time next year we'll be millionaires.
Oh yeah, I hope so. But okay, so I want to pivot a little bit and talk about letting go of like old rivalry.
Right.
And you know as well as I do, Dave, if you want to make a group of BAs laugh, one of the things you can say is, so what does a project manager do then? Seriously, anyone? Right, and like we've all been guilty of that. But actually, good project managers do really good stuff. And if you've got a good project manager and a good BA, you've probably got a pretty good project.
Yeah.
Healthy tension, but that's okay. Professional disagreement. So do you think there's any rivalries we need to let go of as a community? And are there any alliances you think we ought to build, which is like the converse of that question?
Yes, that's a really, really good one, because I could go off on this for about like 5 weeks.
The audience forgive you.
I think, we've been kind of, I think, this is my personal view, so, you know, I'll qualify it up front with that. It doesn't reflect anyone else's views or any other body's views that I know of within the profession. But I think the BAs have had a right kicking over the last few years. I won't name any names in terms of guilty methodologies, but they may sound vaguely like fragile. In the sense of there's perhaps a fragile manifesto, and it says something like, you don't need any roles within a fragile project apart from a designer and a let's call it a scrim master. I don't want to kind of point any fingers here, you know, at anything that's going on. And I think we've suffered a bit in comparison with that. You know, we've allowed that to kind of become a reality. So I think in terms of alliances, it's a tricky one really, because we do make jokes about project managers, you know, and we just live on different apexes of the time cost quality triangle in that sense, you know. PMs are much more interested in time and cost, and we might be more interested in the quality of the output. That's a generalization, but you could make that stick in a court of law possibly. But I do think we almost need to, I think, not reinvent ourselves, but we need to find a way of combating. And I know I said earlier that we shouldn't be combative, but as a profession, I do think we need to find ways of combating this kind of insidious, there isn't any need for a business analyst. Because if people are saying it enough, people will start to believe it.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because I think sometimes, like, a narrative gets built, and either you own the narrative and you change it, or someone else does.
Yeah.
And as a community, it's time we kind of own that narrative. And I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because and this is, again, it's a really dangerous thing to say in front of an entire webinar of BAs, but like, I, for one, have been guilty of saying something along the lines of, oh, I'm just so understood. Like, I haven't said it quite like this, but oh, I'm so misunderstood as a BA. Like, my organisation just doesn't understand us. And I don't know, mate, that's sort of abdicating responsibility, isn't it? Because that's a bit like being an awkward teenager saying, oh, you know, nobody understands me. But, well, actually, the world doesn't really work like that. It's for us to make the world understand us. And if it doesn't, then it's kind of on us, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's reflected in a lot of conversations I've sort of been hearing organisations have about how do we describe the BA role? You know, how do we describe, I think we're struggling with that, you know, in the sense of, we touched on it before the call in the green room, didn't we, about subjective and objective. You know, a lot of the stuff that we do as BAs is subjective. You know, we do a lot of objective stuff. We do user stories, we do process models, we do context diagrams. You can see if one of those is technically right or wrong. But how do you know if someone's facilitated a workshop right, or if somebody's managed a stakeholder relationship right? And it's very difficult to kind of justify something that the finance bods in an organisation can't cost. And I think that's a real struggle for us at the moment. So we somehow need to kind of build some alliances with people who can kind of move us into that world, I think. And it's certainly, I mean, I don't want to point fingers at methods and stuff like that, but, you know, a lot of method is just thinking stuff, you know, in the right way.
Just to interject, a couple of interesting questions, Dave, coming in here. So Hertia says, hi, Dave and Adrian, loving it so far. We could battle this fragile world by showing our value and building our profession, like Deborah Paul and Tina Lovelock indicated in their book, Show Our Value. And of course, Debbie Paul and Tina Lovelock had that, you know, they've released that fantastic BCS book about delivering business analysis, the BA service catalogue, which focuses on the service view. So if you're not familiar with that, I mean, fantastic book. Absolutely 100% agree with Hertia on that. And John raises another really interesting angle as well, which says, does the world really need business analysts, or should we just argue the case for business analysis, as no one else really wants to do it, like project management? And I mean, I know I would wholeheartely agree with John. I don't think the title is that important. It's the analysis, not the analyst, that I advocate for.
And I'm going to put on my cloak of controversy here and say, or should we talk about dealing with change?
Well, quite, yes.
Should we become change analysts or transformation wizards?
Transformation wizards. I think
that's probably not a title I would go with, but a facility ninja, a facilitating ninja or something. But
ninja.
It's kind of, I do think, and this is a huge thing for me to say, because for years and years, and you know me, Adrian, for years I will advocate need for people with business analysis skills until the Earth has become a cinder in the supernova of the solar system, because it is important, it's vitally important that industry and companies have people like us who ask questions.
Yeah.
We're seeing it today without getting too out in the real world. We're seeing it today when communication is not questioned, and messages are not questioned, and processes are announced without anyone going, hang on a minute, I don't think we can actually do that. That's what BAs do. BAs challenge, and they help change things. And I think a business analyst, I've always been hugely proud of being a business analyst, because I think I know what it means. But if people don't know what it means, they think you analyse a business. It's kind of a little bit more than that. It's like when people say to me, oh, you guys just run requirements meetings.
And it's hard to describe, isn't it? And I completely agree. And I think there's a lot of critical thinking involved, isn't there?
Yes.
I mean, like, because, requirements are really just, a usable definition of a need would be one way of describing what a requirement is. But actually, it's the thinking, and not just our thinking, it's the synthesis of other people's thinking.
Yes.
And questioning our own thinking and their thinking. And so I just want to bring in another couple of threads here, Dave, which are related. One, which is, we're talking about letting go. So what about letting go the need to be right, which, we probably all have from time to time, and the need to be liked by everyone. Like, I don't know if you've had this, Dave, but I have had situations where you just can't please you just can't make all stakeholders 100% happy all the time.
No, you can't. And I mean, yeah, the need to be right. I've always said, one of the things I say when I engage with a workshop or a team or whatever is, I get paid for asking stupid questions, and I'm very, very good at it. And so there will be times when you think, why are you asking me this? And it will be bog obvious to you as a client why you think the world works that way. But I'm asking you because A, I don't know. And if I don't know, chances are a lot of other people don't know. So I think this need to be right is something we do have to get away from. We were talking earlier, and I was talking about, I had a huge breakthrough insight a year or so ago when I was doing training lead at my previous company. And I was working with a lot of graduate entrants who I would say to them, what do you need to do? Oh, we need to define the high-level requirements. So we need to work out what all the processes do. Well, yeah, you do. You don't have to do that, don't we? We want to take it into the workshop and have it ready. And I would say to them, well, no, I go into the workshop with a post-it note that says, process starts here.
Yeah.
Another post-it note that says, process finishes here. And in the middle, a post-it note with a question mark. And well, you can't do that. Well, you can, because you don't have to be right. When you come from an academic background, when you've been used to being in the academic background of being marked and having your work marked and quantified and, measured, it's very difficult to get that kind of feeling that actually I could walk in here and sketch 2 arrows and a couple of process boxes up on the wall and then let the audience play with it. And you're probably going to get the best answer.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because another thing I've certainly felt, I don't know about you, Dave, but I remember once I was drawing a use case diagram on a whiteboard. Right, it was with stakeholders. So it didn't have to follow full UML semantics.
No.
And I had this sudden, when you just have a brain freeze, I'm like, hang on a minute, do I need to draw an include or an extend? And which way does the arrow go? And oh my word, if I get it wrong, they're like if I get it wrong, they're all going to laugh at me, right?
Yeah.
And what I took away from that experience is business stakeholders don't generally care about includes and extends, so don't use them, which is one learning point. And two, wouldn't have mattered because it's a communication device. If you're using full object oriented, that would matter. But sometimes we let the notation get in the way, in a way, don't we?
Yeah, I think every tribe likes to have its little language and likes to have its sort of secret language, and there's nothing better than that to either non-functional requirements or data requirements, because we can all get kind of very clever about the notation and whatever. But for me, going into a workshop, and to be honest, I would be worried if I came out of the workshop when I'd drawn a context model and they'd all said, yeah, that's right, because I think we're not thinking about this enough.
Exactly, and it's sort of like when people say yes to things too quickly, and you think,
yes,
have you really considered it? type of
if
thing.
you put a completely finished model in front of a group of people, they will almost invariably, in the effort to save their own work, go, yeah, that looks all right to us.
Yeah.
But put something, I mean, I used to, people laugh when I say this, in every requirements document I wrote in the old days, I used to put the word aardvark in it. And not one person ever came back to me and said, why is there aardvark in chapter page 27? So, you know, sometimes you want to almost deliberately throw something out there that you know to be wrong.
Yeah.
To A, check that people are listening, and B, to make sure that they're actually contributing all they need to contribute. So,
yeah. So there's that real shared understanding. So,
and picking up on the point about needing to be liked, I think it's an important thing for BA to consider. Well, you know, people, if they like you, people will work with you, and you're going to have much more impact on them, and you'll probably have more success. I think it's important to be liked. I think you don't have to be everybody's friend to be liked, though. You know, there's a difference between being liked and being people's friends. And the other important thing, if people like you, they're more likely to notice when you're very, very angry. Whereas actually, if you're angry all the time, it's very, very difficult to make people sit up and pay attention.
That's true. That's true. And it's interesting because as you were talking there, Dave, I sort of have one of those penny drop moments where I was thinking, I'm wondering whether I'm like reflecting on my own experience. I'm wondering whether, like, maybe it's, or for me, maybe it's more for my own conscience. It's more important for me to know I've acted ethically, than to be everyone's friend, and to be respected. Because, like, you know, there are people I have worked with who I respect immensely, who I would work together with tomorrow, but who I disagree with on virtually everything. Like, you know, proper stand-up, but you know, but cordial disagree. And maybe that's what actually, and this is getting dangerously political, but I'll do so in a very specific and controlled way. But maybe we need to get better at, like, you know, actually having cordial disagreements in organisations and in the world. But I'm drawing a line onto that one because it's
I think you should do. But I totally agree with you.
Fantastic. So on that bombshell, Dave, what if there was one takeaway that you would like people to leave this webinar with, or one action, or what would that takeaway or action be?
I think it's, you know, you have to enjoy what you do. And I found, in terms of when it comes to business analysis, learning to let go of a lot of these kind of preconceptions, the need to be right, the need to be in charge, even the need to be liked, in a sense, gives you so much more freedom to be the person you want to be in the workshop. You know, you can actually, it takes away a lot of the fear, you know. And I'm not, you know, what I do, I wouldn't advocate everyone else goes out and does it, because I don't want thousands of people copying me. Because you know, it's not genuine. You have to find your own way of doing these things. But you know, as a BA, I think it's very important to just let things go, just be in the middle of it, and let the kind of dynamic flow around you, and use that to your advantage, really. You know, it doesn't have to be all about you. It's about the outcome. It's about progress, not perfection. You know, that would be what I would probably say in a very long-winded nutshell.
I was imagining, as you were saying there, like a river flowing. Maybe that's an analogy you've used before, Dave. I was imagining like a river.
When I used to teach fencing, not actually like chain link fences or wood panel fences, but the fencing with swords and stuff, to young children and adults, or even young adults, there was a particular parry that was the first parry. It's basically you take the sword out of the scabbard and you end up in this position with the sword facing in that way. So the idea was you drew the sword as your opponent attacked you and let them go round it. You diverted their power. And I think as a BA, a lot of the time we do that. We should be doing that. We should be letting the power flow around us. A bit like a judo, a good judoka would. You know, they would use the enemy's momentum against them, or their opponent's momentum against them. Rather than kind of going head to head with people, you just let that power be deflected and let the group deal with it. And I think that makes things so much easier, because you don't have to worry as much.
Yeah, you can be calmer calm and more collected. So Dave, well, fantastic. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, and I know we could, because we have spent so many hours
numerous locations
in various locations. And I'm certain that people, whether they're tuned in live or whether they are watching the recording, will want to stay in touch with you. They'll want to connect with you. They'll want to know more about how they can go on your presentation skills courses and so on. So how is the best way of people to stay in touch with you, and how can they follow you?
Well, connect with me on LinkedIn is the easiest way, and then you will be getting my posts that I post to my blog. I'm building a website where at the moment I want to be putting things like videos on and some other free resources for people. So predominantly just connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way, and I'm a pretty friendly guy. I'm happy to chat, and then once we're connected, if you've got any questions, just drop me a mail and we can have a chat at length.
Fantastic. And I know there are a few questions we haven't been able to cover tonight, Dave. Are you happy for people to ping you a link on, a note of them on LinkedIn? And
and I'll either put something on my blog with the answers, or we'll pick them up like that.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, Dave, thank you so much. It is always a pleasure to talk to you, Dave. And I'm hoping that at some point we can all be together somewhere physically, but it's unclear when that will be at the moment, of course.
Well, exactly.
But and thank you also to everyone who is, whether you're watching the recording or whether you've tuned in live. Thank you so much for being here. As a reminder, the whole idea behind these BA community webinars is not so much about the core of business analysis, but to explore some stuff around the edges, really. And so with that in mind, if you are attending live, I'm just going to put a couple of links in the chat. So the first link is for a fantastic webinar that is happening next week on the 17th of September called Thriving in Change, the Art of Self-Leadership for Change Professionals. And interestingly, Change Professionals, Dave, you preempted the
there we go.
With George Wilkinson. Highly recommend you take some time out and attend that if you can. Do register early if you can. The webinars are starting to sell out, which is always a pleasing sign. And then the following week, on the 21st of September, we have the next episode of BA Fringe. Now, if you didn't catch the first ever episode of BA Fringe, if you think about a TV show rather than a webinar, for those of you that are of a certain age like me, if you remember Richard and Judy or Anne and Nick or that type of thing, but imagine that mixed with Live at Glastonbury with a bit of QVC thrown in, or actually specifically Bid Up TV that nobody other than me will remember, but that was the look that we're going for. That's the BA Fringe, and we've got a number of guests confirmed on there. We actually have David Allen, who wrote the Getting Things Done book. We have Penny Pullen, who wrote the Virtual Leadership book. We've got Matthew Dean, who's doing a little piece on imposter syndrome, and one other whose name temporarily escapes me. But do take a look at that as well. Also, you will get an email with those links on, and also a link to a survey. Please, I'd really appreciate it if you filled that in. If you've any ideas of stuff you'd like us to cover, let me know. I will absolutely try and make it happen. And indeed, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I'd quite like to speak about a topic, get in touch. That's really what this is about. So if there's a topic you want to talk about, just reply and we can absolutely make that happen. However, that really does bring us to the very end of the session. So once again, Dave, thank you so much for your time. Always love to chat to you, hopefully with a beer next time. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and see you on the next webinar. So good evening.
Cheers, everyone.